I'm glad you've roleplayed this tavern conversation for the past hour, but when do we get to kill things? Role-playing games. Role-playing versus game. If we look at the origins of Dungeons and Dragons, it really started as a dungeon crawler. The dungeon crawl wasn't just an element, it was the thing. Your job, keep your character alive, be clever, get wealthy. Gold pieces, those were experience points. And it wasn't just about killing monsters, that was how your character advanced. And so this was a default for a long time. Games were deadly, but characters, they were quick to make. So, in a sense, life was cheap. Role playing games started out so much further to the game spectrum than what we see today. It was all about being clever and, in a sense, winning, with the dungeon master there to be an impartial judge to decide how things played out versus the monsters and the dungeon and environment and everything else. Your backstory, it wasn't really a thing. So what happened? Well, Dragonlance. Dragonlance entered the scene, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure what came first at this moment. A quick Google would solve this, and I'm going to leave you to do that because I'm not going to. The novels or the adventures? There was an original trilogy of Dragonlance novels, and honestly, I have a soft spot to them for this day. When I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, it was when second edition came out. And the people I played with, Dragonlance was the default. That's where all the adventures took place, was on the magical world of Krynn. So I didn't know anything about Forgotten Realms or any of that until much later, and I think that's part of the reason that I never really cared about it, honestly. But there were also a series of adventures that came out for Dragonlance as well. And so here's the rub. Those adventures, in far as their progression went, mirrored the novels. This was not a sandbox. This, from what I hear, I've never actually played through them, was a straight driven railroad. You went through the events that happened in the book as they happened in the book. So now, as mentioned, this was during the time of second edition, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, 2E was just called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There wasn't a 2E regular, there's just a 2E advanced because basic was happening at this time as well. Basic D&D, which is a whole mess I could get into, but there's plenty of things on the internet if you want to sort all that out. So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition was honestly largely Gary Gygax's attempt to get around some royalty deals that were going on. If you've never listened to the podcast, We Were Wizards, totally suggest it. Great history of early D&D and TSR and Gary himself. But there is a lot more involved to it than basic D&D, hence the advanced moniker that was attached onto there. Character creation was, there were more options, but it's also more complicated. And then 2E just doubled down on that. Now, it's weird to look back now from fifth edition with hindsight to second edition and think, oh, second edition had a lot of options because 5e is just crawling with them. But at the time, 2e had tons of splat books, all the complete fighter's handbook, complete mage's handbook, and there were kits, which I guess like is kind of like the equivalent of prestige classes. Kinda. But there was like more details and more options there than had ever been before. So character building took a long time. And when you add things like non-weapon proficiencies, which would be kind of like skills today, your character became a lot more detailed in terms of, oh, my character knows how to make wine. My character knows how to tie things with rope. They know how to start fires, like all kinds of, they know how to read and write. That was even a proficiency. So those details added to the characters, they personalize them more, right? And there's a lot of non-combat things in there that wouldn't come up in a generally like horror survival game, which is what D&D kind of had been to this point. And so it fostered a lot more role playing. So we have this role playing game spectrum, and Second Eve really started to move it toward role playing. And personally, I believe the complexity of character creation plays a lot into that. If you can make a character in 5 seconds, you don't care much what happens to that character. There's not as much commitment there. You didn't have to put as much into it. Now, if you start building a character in like 5th edition, yeah, you want death saves. You want a chance for that character to live. It has all these little kooky special powers that you put in, and you want a chance to use them. And also, you've probably had like a 20-page backstory. So anyway, 2nd edition happened and did a lot of that work. And that was really solidified in 3/3.5 because that is when the options became ginormous. And you only have to look toward modern day Pathfinder to see that legacy at play. And so, still, because of all of the options in character creation that were mechanical, especially in 3.3.5, mechanical to combat and whatnot, and this was also in 4th edition if we wanted to talk about that, but we don't. There was still a lot of game going on, right? Fast forward to 5th edition, which changed everything. So 5th edition came out and Critical Role happened. And Critical Role introduced so many people to the game. And not only did it introduce a lot of people to the game, it spawned a lot of copycats, or at least inspired a lot of other podcasts and actual play shows where you could watch and listen to people play the game. And these people playing the game for podcasts and actual play shows, it changed because they weren't necessarily playing it for themselves. When you're playing a game around a table, it's for the people at the table. You're your own audience. But when you're playing in a podcast or actual play show, suddenly you're doing it for all the viewers out there. And they don't want to hear you look up how your THACO works for the 10th time. They want to hear the story. And that comes through role playing. So suddenly that needle is buried in the role playing side of things. And then we get everyone talking about the rule of cool, where it doesn't matter what the rules of the game are in the role playing game. If it sounds cool, we're going to go for that instead and bend the rules as needed. Now, almost in reaction to that, and started before this really, there's the OSR, the old school revival. Folks who really enjoyed the game aspect of the game, the simplicity of character making, the death. Old school games are generally more dangerous. All the different little subsystems. It's a whole different style that gears more toward the game part of it than the role playing. And of course, D&D is not the only game out there. There are story games galore. And that's a little bit of a nebulous classification. And what's a story game? Games that say they are. But I think of games like Fiasco, that there are no tests, no roles you have to make to succeed or fail at something. It's a loosely structured improv exercise. And also a lot of fun. Now, after my last episode, I got a lot of feedback on a situation I presented there where people mostly mentioned, well, you need to role play it. Your character doesn't know that, so you need to act like you don't know that. And it's just interesting to see how much the dynamic has shifted from game to role playing. And there's not as much room left for the game part of it anymore. Now, I still posit that there is not a right or a wrong way to do this. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you can explore your playstyle and the playstyle of other people at the table. You don't have to roleplay at all. You can treat every role-playing game like a dungeon crawl and roll dice and kill monsters and get loot and lather, rinse, repeat. That's fun, at least for some people. Or you can have your 1 hour tavern conversation, go entire sessions without rolling dice, and just lose yourself in improv and being the character and feeling out that story. Also fine. But the point is, now that you know about this, you get to make that a decision that you actually make as opposed to just happen into. So what's your play style like? Do you find yourself falling somewhere along this like role-playing versus game spectrum? Do me a favor and go to crumblingkeep.com/question and leave me a little voice note. Tell me your thoughts on this. You can find the link in the show notes.